It's through knowing God, through the cross of Christ, that this transforms lives.
Revelation came that actually I was loved, and I was loved unconditionally by God.
It's because God waits for us to come and say, I can't. And then he goes, okay, I can.
Well, Revelation says that when the kingdom of heaven comes, there'll be no more tears.
Hi and welcome to Cross and Light. My name's Birgit Whelan and it's really lovely to be back with you for another program. Well, today on the program we're going to be hearing a testimony about the way God has brought freedom and healing to my guest's life in the area of emotional eating, also sometimes known as comfort eating. Now this may be something that you have personal experience with, and if so, we pray that this really offers some encouragement to you today. But even if the whole issue of emotional eating is not something that you have any experience with, we're hoping that this whole thing of God being able to meet us in an area of need and bring meaningful change, that will be a source of encouragement to you as well. So joining me to share her testimony and discuss this topic today is founder of Fit for Life Forever and author of How to Stop Dieting and Start Living, Sue Prosser. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's great to have you back because you've been with us a couple of times and shared about this topic and your story, so it's really good that you're able to be part of the program again today. Well, I wonder if we could just start off, if you could just give some idea about what emotional eating or comfort eating actually is.
Sure, well, emotional eating is basically just eating for any reason other than to fulfill physiological hunger. In other words, we have other hungers in our life which we can't perhaps identify specifically. We just feel hungry and we go for food, but in fact we're using food to meet needs that food was never intentioned to meet and indeed can't. So it can be a whole range of emotions behind this. The obvious ones are obviously when we feel low about ourselves, low self-esteem. It can be to try and self-medicate because of past pain in our life that's not been resolved. It can be due to stress or to fear, or loneliness or boredom. So there's a whole range of emotions that can lead us to eat inappropriately.
Is there always an awareness that that's what's happening when people reach for food in those circumstances?
No, I don't think we are always aware at all. In fact, this is one of this is why trying to cut down on eating and diet is so difficult, because if we just say, well, I'll eat when I'm hungry, a person who is eating for emotional reasons is always hungry.
Yes, true.
And they haven't yet learnt to discern the difference between what the feelings inside of physiological hunger and that heart hunger, which comes when we're eating for emotional reasons.
Well, we're going to return to this and look at what it's like to be trapped in this kind of cycle if this is something that a viewer is struggling with. But in the meantime, I wonder if we can talk about your experience and your story and your testimony of God really meeting you in this and bringing amazing transformation in your life. I wonder if you could just take us back to the beginning and share your journey with us.
Sure. Well, I certainly wasn't aware that I ate for emotional reasons until really perhaps when God began to intervene in this whole area of my life about 7-8 years ago.
Right.
However, I can look back over my life and I can see clearly now that even as a very small child, I would eat for emotional reasons. My parents didn't get on well together, and so there was often a lot of tension and discord in the home, and sometimes that could be quite frightening for me. Other times I would perhaps blame myself and think that perhaps it was something I was doing that was causing it. So you don't understand, you haven't got that adult perspective on things. And as a child, not understanding, you feel very vulnerable. And so all I can really, as I look back, I know that I was always hungry. I do know I was always hungry. And that often I can see myself as a child sat there with a tin of biscuits, you know, the big Peak Freens, tins of biscuits on my knee, and just eating through them, and perhaps in a sort of, not really aware of what I was eating, but just conscious of discord in the background. And I'm sure that I was eating to try and comfort myself in the midst of this storm that was all around me. And that sense of discord continued in that relationship with my parents, especially with my mother, throughout my life. It was a constant area of stress. And I know it would be a case sometimes of going visiting and then leaving to come home again. And, oh, well, a box of chocolates will make it better.
Wow, that's interesting.
You know,
Yeah.
and it would just sort of like clear the air, get that out of my system, and to try and move on from there. But food was often the way in which I would initially seek to resolve it without realising it.
Can I just ask you at this point, as you were eating, you described this box of biscuits or this tin of biscuits and the box of chocolates. As you were actually eating for those reasons, how did that make you feel?
Looking back, certainly as a child, it didn't make me feel anything in terms of, oh, aren't I a failure, I'm eating, because I wasn't aware, I didn't have those kind of self-image problems back then. I was just simply eating because I was hungry.
Did it provide the emotional comfort, though, in the moment that you were looking for?
Probably not.
Okay.
Probably not. And no more than my teddy bear did as
Right.
a small child, or
Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
or a night out with the girls or something as I got older. But certainly, as I became aware of needing to control my weight,
Yeah.
the first time I dieted was when I was 23, 24, in the run-up to being married.
Okay.
Although I'd seen the weight steadily pile on from the time I'd left school, probably because I wasn't doing the same physical exercise more than anything.
Right.
And so from the age of 23 onwards, I was a yo-yo dieter.
Yeah.
And so I became a lot more conscious of my successes and failures, and reaching for the box of chocolates or the Snicker bar, or whatever it was, would fill me then with a sense of, oh, I'm supposed to be on a diet and I've blown it. And it gives you a feeling of guilt and shame. And then it's a vicious circle, because the way in which you then try and feel better about yourself
Yeah.
is to eat.
Yes. Yeah.
It can lead you then on into sort of, well, to eating secretly. You know, because you're ashamed of what you're doing, and everybody thinks you're on a diet, and you are on a diet. So therefore, when I am going to fall, I'm going to fall in secret and pretend that I'm succeeding. So it brings this whole area of deceit into your life as well.
Yes, it's really interesting to hear that cycle that, you know, you're in this whole thing of wanting to lose weight, and then the pressure at some point kind of, you know, all the pressure that you put on yourself sometimes means that you rebel against it and go and have something, but then that guilt and shame you experience in itself spurs you on to eat more. So we're really beginning to get a sense, I guess, of just the nature of the cycle and the shame associated with it and the difficulty of it, really. So you've described then this passion of yo-yo dieting. That lasted for a number of years through your life, didn't it?
Yes, indeed. And, you know, I could lose weight.
Yeah.
I won't say easily, but if I set myself a goal, I could often lose weight.
Yeah.
But the problem was the putting it back again afterwards, not being able to maintain that. And when I put the weight back on, I put more weight on
Right.
than I'd lost. And this isn't really the remit of what we're talking about now, but I now understand that there are physiological reasons why that happens to us, because of the way in which dieting upsets our metabolism. But of course, when you just look at it in terms of what the scales say, again, that whole sense of shame, and I've blown it, and, you know, into the next size of clothing, and
Yeah.
the whole thing just becomes very burdensome, and it preoccupies your mind. You're constantly thinking about food.
Yes.
And you develop this sort of love-hate relationship. You love it because it tastes good and because it seems to meet an emotional need maybe at the time, but you also hate it because it's, you know, it's going to pile on the pounds.
Absolutely. And I guess it is something that we do need to be able to manage, because we all need to have our 3 meals in a day. But as you're describing this sort of difficulty, this difficult relationship with food that develops, even that very natural relationship with food can become distorted, or there can be a pressure that comes on with that.
That's right. So you just can never enjoy food the way that God intended us to. I mean, it's supposed to be pleasurable without all the guilt associated with it. And yet, for so many people, and indeed for myself, that was sort of lost because of this constant awareness of, oh, I'm going to pay for this tomorrow if I enjoy it, or I'm going to feel miserable if I deny myself today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We come to a point in your story where God really breaks through, but before we get to that stage, I'm just interested, as a Christian, how was God meaningful to you in the struggle through your life? Was it something that you prayed about to God? Did you sense God's leading in any way through over these years?
I became a Christian when I was 16.
Right.
And was in full-time ministry by the time I was 30. So yes, very much a committed Christian. And the way in which I brought God into this whole problem in my life was usually to pray, God, help me to stick to my diet.
Right.
Which I now realise was just as futile as asking him to help me stick to the Old Testament laws, because that just isn't really God's way of addressing this issue. But certainly I prayed and asked God to help me to have more willpower, to be stronger. And I do believe he helped me in that. And I would give him, when I lost weight, I would give him the glory. But then when you put the weight back on, that just compounds your guilt, because you feel not only have you let yourself down and failed the diet, but you feel like you've let God down as well. And there were times when I would just simply sort of bring the whole thing back to God and sort of say, well, it's your fault, God, you made me big, you know, and try and relieve the pressure on me that way. But it wasn't constructive at all, really.
Well, it's just interesting, Sue, because we really can get an impression now about how much of a difficulty this whole area can be in people's lives. The way that you describe that it preoccupies thoughts, that there's a lot of guilt and shame associated with it, just this sort of cycle of being locked into this kind of cycle. We can really see that it really can be quite an area of difficulty for people. In your own experience, though, things got a lot worse before you had the experience of God really breaking through. I wonder if you can just describe that part of your experience.
Yeah. For me, that crisis came in 2003.
Yeah.
When, as missionaries, we had gone to serve the Lord, as we thought, for 5 years in Tanzania. But when we got there, the situation was very different to what we had imagined, and the whole relationship dynamics with the leadership team we were involved with was not a healthy one.
Right.
And so the outcome of this was that after 6 months of trying to adapt and to fit in, we spoke to our leadership back here in the UK, and they advised us, in view of that situation, to come home.
Right.
And so we did come home, but we came home to nothing.
Yeah.
We'd rented out our home, so we were staying in the house of friends, which was very kind of them. We had no work lined up because, of course, our work was scheduled to be out in Tanzania.
Yes.
But more than that, there was a sense of shame and failure, because we were experienced missionaries, experienced Christians, mature. Surely we'd heard God, and people had believed us, and therefore had come behind us financially to help us to go and to provide for our needs while we were there. One church, for instance, had bought us our vehicle, which had cost about £8,000.
Right.
And when we left, we were not reimbursed for that. We had to leave, you know. So there was that sort of, oh my goodness, you know, people have trusted us. We've let them down. We felt we'd let God down. We wondered if we'd ever be trusted again in ministry. So there was this real sense of shame and failure, plus the hurts of a relationship which had been fraught with tension.
Yes.
Then, not having work when we came back, I was bored. And I was in someone else's home, so I couldn't constructively do much. We came back home to England towards the end of October. And by that time, the shops are, as we now realise, full of all the Christmas goodies and enticements. And whilst in Tanzania, we'd had plenty of food, but it had been more basic than what we'd find. Obviously, we hadn't got the extensive brands and food availability that we have in this country. So coming back, even though it was only after 6 months, and going into the supermarkets, everything was flagged up as a must-have food and was very enticing. So those were all reasons. Then Christmas itself, of course, when caution is blown to the wind and, you know, you just binge for 2 weeks or something. But then it was in the January. I mean, I wasn't aware of all this going on in my life in terms of my eating. This is all retrospectively that I can see what emotions were going on in my
Yes.
life. But after Christmas, we went for a holiday to Malta, which apparently you love or hate. And at that time of the year, it didn't have a lot to commend it, to be honest.
Okay.
Not to my liking. And the hotel was mediocre. The weather was bad. We couldn't do much. But I remember that the hotel was all buffet-style meals,
Okay.
and and it was this sense of, I'm going to get my money's worth one way or another out of this
Right.
holiday. So I just ate and ate. It was when I got back home and got on and bought some scales,
Yes.
got on the scales, I realised I was at my heaviest ever. But more than that, I actually put on 20 pounds in a period of less than 2 months, probably about 6 weeks.
It's really interesting, Sue. You've painted quite a picture, and it's really helpful to see all of the stages in this when you came back from the missionary trip and just the feelings surrounding that. And then, there's other factors, the fact that it's Christmas time, the foods that are available, and especially with this background of not having the variety of all these foods that you're seeing, very calorific foods that you're seeing, the boredom because you didn't have work immediately, and now this holiday, and how just the kind of perspectives or ways of thinking we have regarding food, and what you just said about, well, I'll get my money's worth with a buffet style food.
Crazy.
Yeah. So all of these things you can begin
Yeah.
to see how it did influence your eating through this time. So here you are. You've come back to
Yeah.
the UK. You stand on the scales.
And I am horrified.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I cry out to God.
Yeah.
At the same time as saying, God help me, I've got to lose weight. I mean, I realised that my health was beginning to suffer. I did have high blood pressure. My knee joints were beginning to hurt with the weight I was carrying.
Yeah.
And I realised that for my health's sake, if not for my look's sake, I needed to lose weight.
Yes.
And cried out to God to help me. But at the same time, I'm saying, God, I can't face another diet, because I knew my track record. I would lose weight and then put it back on.
Yes.
And I was frightened, actually, that given this track record, it wouldn't be long before I would maybe be 15 stone, then 16 stone. And where was all this going to end? So the first thing that I remember saying, well, God, why have I put on all this weight in such a short time? And I've already shared with you how, in retrospect, I could see what had been happening. And just to own the fact that I was eating in an out-of-controlled way to try and meet my emotional need was in itself a revelation.
Right.
So
that was God really answering in that
absolutely,
respect,
because
giving you that
have to know
understanding.
the truth.
Yes.
For the truth to set you free.
Yes.
So this was me beginning to own what was at work in my life.
Yeah.
And that even though I considered myself to be a mature Christian, that clearly this was an area of my life where Jesus was not in control.
Yes.
And of all the concepts in the Christian life that appealed most to me, and which I'd really tried to follow throughout my life, was this whole concept of the Lordship of Christ over different areas of my life. And although you struggle to surrender and say yes to God, looking back over 40 years of Christian experience, this had been the way of fulfillment, of joy, of experiencing that Christ life. It was always the way of surrender.
Yes.
And so I saw that here was a whole area of my life, my relationship with food, which I'd never even thought of surrendering.
That's amazing. That is such a revelation in itself. And actually it can be applied to different areas of our lives.
Yes, indeed.
And what's really striking me is just the lack of awareness sometimes. There may be this whole area of our lives we haven't even considered, as you say, surrendering to God. But here in this situation, things have come together in such a way that you've realised that God is interested in every area and that we need Him in every area.
Yeah.
So you then have this awareness, you have to give this over to God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a deliberate prayer that I would make Jesus the Lord of my whole relationship with food.
Yeah.
And that He would teach me to have a spirit-controlled appetite.
Right.
That then became my goal. My goal wasn't just to lose weight, to look better,
Yeah.
or even to be healthy, although that was a very legitimate part of what I wanted.
Yes.
My goal now is to have a spirit-controlled appetite, so that all my choices and the whole relationship I had with food would come under him.
Right.
So it was submitting that to him. And I realised how necessary this was, because for each one of us, God has called us for a purpose, and it's to glorify him.
Yeah.
And I hadn't even seen before, but there's scriptures that speak of glorifying God in our body,
Yes.
of presenting our bodies as a living sacrifice, which
Yeah.
is submission of this physical being
Yes.
into the hands of God.
Yeah.
And yet I'd spiritualized all of this.
Yeah.
And there is spiritual elements, obviously, but just in the most plain and obvious way, it means that our bodies and our bodily appetite has to come under the control of the Lord Jesus Christ.
So before we go on with our discussion, I just do want to mention to the viewers the book that you've written about your experience and what God has shown you. This is Sue's book. It's called How to Stop Dieting and Start Living, and it's in its 5th print, isn't
Yes,
it?
indeed, yeah.
Amazing. If you would like to follow up on this, I think Sue's details, her ministry details, Fit for Life Forever, have come up during the program. So feel free to follow up that way and make contact with Sue. So we're talking now about God giving you this revelation, and also your understanding of now surrendering this whole area to the Lordship of Christ.
Yeah.
I wonder if you can just pick up from this. And also, I'm interested in another principle which you've written about in your book called awareness eating, how that was part of your journey with God, how God actually showed you this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you describe what that is?
Sure. I mean, if we're going to lose weight, then obviously we have to take in fewer calories than we're expending.
Yes.
And the conventional way of the world, in man's wisdom, is to go on a diet.
Yes.
For which we have sort of regulations of one type or another, which will control either the number of calories we eat, or the types of food we eat, or the portion we eat. And it's all done quantitatively.
Yes.
It's all measured out. The only alternative to that, and I believe this is actually the Bible way, because it all fits in with surrendering it all to God, is that we learn to work in association with God, in partnership with the Holy Spirit, to understand what our bodily needs are.
Yes.
So we eat within the bounds of our own hunger and satisfaction.
Yes.
So I eat to fulfill physiological hunger when I feel hungry. And I stop eating at the point at which I am satisfied, as opposed to stuffed.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that takes some self-control, of course.
Yes.
But it's that becoming aware of what's going on in your life. It's also becoming aware of why you're eating
Yes.
on a regular, continuous basis. So if I feel hungry, the first thing I would ask is, well, am I really hungry, or what's going on in my life? And these days, 7 years on, I really don't think I do eat for emotional reasons anymore, which is really exciting to know.
It is. I mean, this is the freedom and the healing that we're talking about, and how Jesus can make that difference in any area of our lives. And even if it has been something we have struggled with our whole lives, that Christ is able to bring transformation and to restore us. We actually only have a few minutes left in the program. It goes by so quickly, but I just wonder if you can share with the viewers the physical benefits that you experience. You're talking now about this freedom that you have experienced through God being involved in this, but also physically, because the reality is that in working in cooperation with God in this, you actually did lose quite a substantial amount of weight.
I lost 4 stone.
Yes, it's amazing.
Yeah, well, immediately my health picked up.
Yeah.
I haven't had pains in my joints, really, from that time on. My blood pressure is normal. I know that because I've only recently had it checked, and it's remained normal ever since. The other thing was that back in 1991, I had a back injury which left me with a residual problem that it would easily get put out again, and then I'd have to go and see a chiropractor and get some attention on it. It would be okay. And I was told that if I lost weight, that problem would probably go. And indeed it has.
Amazing.
I've hardly suffered from any back pain at all since then. So physically, It has made the world of difference.
that's amazing.
And at a time in my life when really we need to be especially careful, because as you go into older age, I won't say old age, but as you get older, of course, there's that whole problem of the possibility of diabetes and heart disease and all the things that can happen if we are overweight. It certainly increases the risks of those things. So physically I have, and also, you know, mentally too, because you
Yes.
just feel better, your whole self-confidence and everything is so much better when you're a normal weight.
We have less than 2 minutes left, but I really just want to conclude this by just talking about Jesus, talking about God, offering viewers hope. If this is actually an area that they too struggle with, but in any area of difficulty, can Jesus bring freedom and healing?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, as you just asked me that question, the scripture that came to me, that God is a very present help
Yeah.
in time of need. And whatever our need is, we can turn to Him with it. And He has the answer. And it's a journey. It's not a quick fix.
Yeah.
It's God working in us, you know, and we work out our salvation as He works in us. So it's a partnership with the Holy Spirit. But if we are willing to let Him be Lord of our life, then He will take us hand in hand on that journey.
Yeah.
And it's so exciting and it glorifies Him.
So it has been so encouraging hearing your whole testimony in this area and really actually giving God glory in this, that He has brought that transformation, that healing, that freedom that you were looking for. We have mentioned your book, How to Stop Dieting and Start Living, in case the viewers would like to follow up on this. Sue's ministry details, Fit for Life Forever, you can contact her there. In the meantime, I look forward to seeing you on the next edition of Cross and Light, and in the meantime, God bless you. Bye-bye.